Making sound decisions is a really important part of phase 2 of Feeling Congested, our consultation process where we're looking at the transportation planning policies that exist at the City of Toronto. And all this leads to revisions to our official plan, that regulatory document that guides how we make decisions about transportation planning and other kinds of planning in the city. Now, we're really lucky in the City of Toronto because we embed our transportation planning right into the heart of our official plan. And we do this because we recognize that how we plan land, how we build our neighborhoods and our communities, and how we plan for growth and change is intrinsically linked to how we move about in the city. So the official plan has a transportation vision. Now, in the center of the screen, you'll see there's some yellow blocks, and that transportation vision really is connected to four key ideas. The first idea is a really obvious one. It's all about moving people. How do people get from point A to point B in a way that is pleasurable and safe and convenient? Now, moving goods is about supporting our economy and recognizing that goods movement is a fundamental part of ensuring that we have good business development in our city. Now, the third part might seem a bit more surprising, and that is about moving less. The vision in the official plan is about recognizing that the extent to which we can plan the urban structure of the city, that means where we put what uses, the extent to which we can plan them in such a way that we can choose to move less. We can, in fact, choose to walk to the doctor or the dentist, or walk to school, or walk to do groceries, or we can do things within a short transit ride of home that benefits the city in a whole variety of different ways, including being the least impactful way of planning a city in terms of investing in infrastructure. Now, the fourth part is about moving minds, and that is about recognizing that there was a way of moving in the past, and the way we've moved in the city has always been evolving and changing. In fact, in 1945, we're a hardcore transit city. The majority of our trips were by transit. Then we went through a shift, and I would argue we're going through another shift right now, and that's why these transportation policies are so important. But you can see there in the outer circle that when we're talking about this vision of transportation planning, we're not just talking about streets and bicycles and good movements and motorists and parking and, of course, transit. We are also talking about land use planning. Now, transit is, however, a key part of that vision in the official plan, and there are 24 projects that have been approved and or supported in some way by Metrolinx and or Toronto City Council over many years. Now, we've looked at all of these projects and we've mapped them out, and we really believe that in an ideal world, we would implement all of them. But we know that we have limited resources, and we need to think about how we can, in fact, prioritize these projects. And we've been asked to do that by the City of Toronto City Council. Now, let's take a look at what those 24 rapid transit projects look like. 18 of them are included in the Big Move. That's Metrolinx's plan. The first four that you see on the top there are called the Next Wave, and the Big Move beyond the Next Wave are the 14 projects that follow. Then we've also have a series of projects that have been identified in the official plan. These are the ones in gray, in the official plan or as other projects. Now, we've taken all of these projects together, and just to be clear, this excludes GO Transit projects and smaller new transportation projects. Really what we're looking at here is our larger scale rapid transportation projects. Now, we've had to figure out a way, well, we've got all these projects and we need a data-based or an evidence-based way of thinking through the implications of these projects and what projects ought to be the priority. In the absence of winning the lottery, we have to prioritize these projects. And we know that we have to get moving and building many of them right now, but we have to have a really solid way of thinking through which projects ought to be a priority. So first thing we did, of course, was map all of these projects, and you can see them all here mapped, and I hope it's not too small on your screen, but I'm just going to walk through a little bit of what you see in front of you. The light blue you probably recognize as our existing infrastructure. Now, essentially what you see there is the subway and the existing light rail transit lines that exist in the city already today. Then in a darker blue, you see the projects that are currently funded and are either under construction or are planned to be under construction. So to orient you, right in the middle of your screen, you see a nice long line. That's the Eglinton Crosstown, which is now under construction as I speak. Now, the rest of the lines that you see that are all numbered and named, those are the 24 projects that I was just talking about in the previous slide. You know, all the ideas that have come forward over the years that have some merit. They've been assessed in some way from a technical perspective, and we know that they all have some merit, but our question was, what kind of a filter do we put them through in order to test these projects and to determine which ones ought to be our priority projects. So if you participated in the first phase of feeling congestion, you'll remember that we introduced a series of criteria. Now, these criteria we brought forward, and I'm going to flip to them in a minute, but we brought these criteria forward and we asked you, we said, do these criteria make sense? Is this the way we should be thinking about transit in relation to our larger vision for the City of Toronto that we're trying to build? So this is a slide you probably recognize from the first phase, and we organized them in 3 categories, which you can see on the left side of the screen there. Transit for prosperity, I'm going from the bottom up for some reason, transportation for places, and transportation for people. Now, I'm going to walk through each one of these criteria and explain them a little bit, but before I do, it's important for you to know that in the context of our first phase, we had over 400 people participate in in-person meetings. We had over 7,000 people use our MetroQuest tool on our website, and we had over 30,000 people visit our website or comment on our website. And you know what you told us about these criteria that we have on the screen here? You told us that they make sense. We asked you to rank them, and almost unilaterally, the first reaction we always got was, they all matter. All of these criteria matter. So in thinking through which criteria to weigh as being more valuable, and you'll see there's an implication, you get different priorities if you weigh them in different ways. We in fact just want to emphasize that it's really nuanced. In fact, there's a really good argument for weighing all of these criteria equally and seeing what kind of an outcome we get in terms of priority projects. And if that doesn't make sense, don't worry. I'm going to walk through how we did that in the next part of the presentation. But just to tell you a bit more about these different criteria that form the basis of our evaluation framework. So the first one, it's in the top line there, is experience. So if we said we have a transit project here, let's look at the Jane Street LRT. We wanted to ask the question, what is the maximum ridership experienced at any point on the line? So is it going to be over capacity? Is it going to be under capacity? But another key question with respect to experience, and I chose experience first here because in fact this was the one that many of you told us was the most important criteria. So the second question is the percentage reduction in total time, so that means getting in, waiting, or the time you spend in the vehicle, that it takes to travel from one end to the line to the other. So is there a significant reduction in travel time? Because sometimes you can put higher order transit in and really, you know, the difference is negligible. But there's some lines where the difference, putting that rapid transit in, actually creates a significant impact on the travel experience and the amount of time that it takes you to get from one point to another. So that's experience as one of the criteria. And basically what we did was we took those 24 projects and we pumped them through this criteria, and voila, on the other side out came our priorities. So experience is one. I also would like to tell you about the other ones. Choice is another important one. So if we use choice as our key criteria, we're essentially exploring the proposed projects in relation to the number of stations on the line with transfers available to other lines. So how much does it result in increasing your choice in how you move through the transportation system? The third criteria here is social equity. And for this criteria, we evaluated the lines based on the number of people from priority neighborhoods that are within walking distance of the line. So if social criteria was the only, social equity was the only criteria, then we would be focusing primarily on servicing priority neighborhoods in the City of Toronto. Shaping the city, another important criteria, and this is about looking at the percentage of the line that passes through designated mixed-use growth areas. So this is recognizing that we want to drive as much growth as possible in the city to areas where we have higher order transit. So the extent to which any new proposed line goes through a mixed-use growth areas is going to score higher. If it's in an area where there isn't a lot of mixed use and there isn't a lot of growth, then that proposed line would score lower. Now, health matters a tremendous amount as well. So another criteria is healthy neighborhoods. And with respect to this criteria, we really ask the question, the likelihood that people will walk or cycle to transit based on the distance between shops on the line and the proximity to neighborhoods. So you can just imagine when we went through this process, laying out on a map and drawing radii, walking radii, and identifying how much fell within those walking radii. And the next criteria is public health and the environment. And this is about recognizing as a key criteria the percentage change in total vehicle kilometers traveled in the area within walking distance of the line. And this is a very important criteria as well. Supporting growth is about the percentage of land within walking distance of the line, which is designated specifically for employment growth. So earlier I was talking about mixed use areas, which is all of the growth together, but this criteria is really based on an economic development driver, if you will. Really the idea here is you evaluate any given transit line that's proposed based on how much of the land for the line it was within walking distance of a designated employment growth area. And this is really important to the city because we want to continue to provide great access to our employment areas moving forward by transit. Now, the last evaluative piece here is affordability. And you're probably starting to get the feeling that, wow, all of these really do matter. It's really important to overlay all of them. Well, affordability is about the total capital cost of the line divided by the 2031 projected peak period riders. So we look at the urban form of the city and where we want growth to go. And then we look at how many people, based on where we want growth to go, in 2031 would be riding on any given proposed line. And this is under the category of affordability because we know the higher that number, we know the less expensive the transit becomes because we're providing more transit for less money if we're directing where those transit lines go based on where we want our peak growth to go. So affordability was another important criteria there. And the graphic you see underneath just reflects the current transit investment in Toronto. So some of the existing projects, the ones in gray, are all ones that are well underway in terms of construction. And the $8.4 billion projects are the light rail projects, and the Eglinton Crosstown is the one that is underway right now, but the other ones are being designed and going out to procurement. So that's the evaluation framework. Now, what I'm going to do is take those 24 projects and I'm going to matrix them with these 8 criteria. So this is what you get. Don't be overwhelmed. What you get here are the criteria on the left-hand side of the screen, and it might be a bit hard to read, but all of those different projects, so there's a snapshot of the results, are outlined along the top. So for example, anywhere where you see a complete black circle, that's a perfect score. So when we look at the impact on choice, the relief line, formerly known as the downtown relief line, the relief line in fact scores very high. For experience, the relief line scores very high. For shaping the city, it scores very high. But let's pick another one. If you go to K, right in the middle of the screen, the Jane LRT, it scores very high for choice, very high for experience, very high for social equity, very high for shaping the city, very high for healthy neighborhoods, not quite as high for public health and the environment, but again, it scores great again for supporting growth. So you can actually look at the different criteria and look at the different lines and see how they score, what the implication is of those different lines. So, and I'm going to show you what happens when we weigh all of those equally. I'm going to show you the top performing projects. But just before I do that, I want to explain a little bit about some of the maps that I'm going to show you next. Now, what we did here was we had 2 transportation planning city staff. We involved 2 outside transportation planning experts, and we also involved an expert in transportation planning from the TTC. And they went through and ranked all of these projects. And they used a methodology that is very much a consensus-based model, although they began first with their own individual scoring, and then they went back and identified the points of conflict and resolved those conflicts in order to come up with the weightings that you see here today. So you're going to see first, what I'm going to show you is the outcome from what we've called the unweighted criteria. And that's when we say, okay, let's just take all of these 8 criteria that I just walked through, put them through the filter, and let's see what projects score highest. Let's identify the top 5 performing and the next 5 performing. So this is what that looks like in terms of that chart that I just showed you. The relief line scores very high. The Don Mills LRT ends up being in the top 5, as does the Scarborough Malvern LRT. We also have the Waterfront West and the Waterfront East LRTs as scoring in the top 5 performing projects. And then the ones you see there in the yellow color, those ones are the next 5 performing transit projects. So what does that look like in plan view? So going back to that map that I showed you earlier, we've used the same key here. So the dark blue projects are the projects that are already funded, and the projects that you see here in a solid red line are the ones that are in the top 5, and the ones that you see in the dotted line are the ones that are in the next 5. And these are if we weigh them all the criteria equally. But what happens if we say, well, you know what, let's weight them differently? And so we went through this exercise as well. We went through and we weighted them all differently. And this is that process that I was just telling you about, where we had professionals evaluating them. And they essentially created an expanded evaluation matrix. So to support what you see here, there's actually a very detailed matrix that goes through an evaluation and measures under each one of those criteria, and then puts a score beside each one of the measures. And this methodology that they used here is actually called the human or manual average scoring matrix, and it was based on a mathematical equation to create the summaries of the various criteria. So this is the outcome that we see, and you can take a look there, look for your favorite lines and identify how well they do. And you'll notice, for example, that the Waterfront West LRT just kind of knocks it off the chart. The Waterfront East LRT knocks it off the chart. I was really surprised at how well the Jane LRT scored. It scored extremely well for all of them, as did the Don Mills LRT. And then the relief line is the very first one that you see there in the column. So there's a few projects that really pop to the top very consistently. Now, what happens if you say, well, experience is the most important criteria? This is actually what you see. There's a little bit of a rejigging and a reordering. We see the relief line, the Don Mills LRT, the Eglinton LRT West, the Scarborough Malvern LRT, and the Waterfront West in the top 5. Now, what if we use social equity, the social equity criteria? We see a little bit of a rejigging. Don Mills moves up to the top, Eglinton LRT West, the Jane LRT, the Scarborough Malvern LRT, they all move right into the top 10. So things bump around a little bit here. You can see with healthy neighborhoods, again, the Dundas Street BRT suddenly makes it onto the top 5. We also see both the Waterfront East and the Waterfront West jumping into the top 5 as well. Now, if we look at supporting growth and shaping the city, and we pulled these 2 out because we thought these were the 2 criteria that were most comprehensive in looking at the kind of city that we're trying to create. The top 5 performing projects you get are the LRT, the Yonge North Subway, the Jane LRT, the Waterfront West, and the Waterfront East. And in part, that's because they're going to score really, really well in terms of shaping the city because there's so much growth going into the core of the city. But they also identify some of the key gaps. If you look at where there's really big gaps in the city, they come up very quickly as well. So part of what we've tried to do here is show some scenarios, and the question we want to ask you in the context of this consultation process is, Do the criteria make sense? Like the way we're approaching this, does it make sense? Does it need some tweaking and some refining? That's the first question. And the second is, we want to ask you about the implications of this approach. We're trying to provide a bit of a window here into how we think through making good transportation planning decisions. And this presentation has focused specifically on transit. And will join us on Twitter at CongestedTO. You'll join us on Facebook. And importantly, we have kind of a super cool tool at feelingcongested.ca. If you go to the website, this tool allows you to actually play around with the different criteria. And we also have some additional elements on that site related to creating complete streets, which is all about creating complete communities in our city. And we also have on there some information regarding a bicycle policy framework, some ideas that we'd like to add into the official plan, and we're asking for your input and feedback. Thanks so much for joining me, and I do hope you'll visit us at feelingcongested.ca, where we also have posted our public meetings and our discussion panel times. Thanks so much.